First up, the TUC is holding its annual congress this week. The federation of the country's biggest unions is busy preparing for what could be a new government that's slightly nicer to them. But they're also still fighting the current one. They're reporting the government to the UN Workers' Rights Watchdog over the recently introduced strike law. Alex, the law applies to sectors like health, education and transport to impose minimum service levels on strike days. How strictly is that enforced? I mean, it's only just come into effect.
I mean, we don't know yet, is the answer.
What are the?
It hasn't been used yet.
What are the penalties?
I mean, the idea is that it opens up unions to being sued for damages from either private or public organizations, and it opens up individual employees to sanctions, including being sacked if they don't turn up when they're meant to turn up. I think looking behind the legislation, I'm not sure how effectively it can ever be used because, and this is something we have, I think, touched on before, we're talking about organizations. If you look at the railways, if you look at the NHS, these are organizations which rely to a huge extent on staff's goodwill. Actually, if staff simply refused to take overtime, turned up on time and left on time, and took their regulated lunch break and their holiday days and basically just worked to rule, those, the railways, the NHS would just fall apart at the seams. So I don't know how much of a realistic threat it is. It's clearly there to appeal to a particular slice of Tory voter, I think. My sense is it's a category error, and it goes back to actually the North during the Thatcher years, because I think that is the muscle memory of the Tory party is those years. So they look at being tough on unions. You've got Greg Hands sort of tweeting about how Labour are, the party of strikes and soft on strikes, tough on the general public. You might have been able to do that when you were talking about a very small group, just a few thousands miners, in one industry, in one particular geographic area. But when you're talking about nurses, teachers, postal and rail workers, barristers, doctors, civil servants, cleaners, ambulance drivers, bus drivers, refuse collectors, firefighters. I'm forgetting many, I'm sure, all of whom have had to resort to industrial action in order to be heard. I don't know that they can separate them from the general public. That pretty much is the general public. So I don't know to whom they're appealing other than, I guess, people who don't do any of those jobs.
Podcasters.
I fucking hate strikes.
The TUC have done two separate things here. They've approved a motion of a strategy of non-compliance. They've also claimed that the law falls short of stipulations by the International Labour Organization, the UN's labour watchdog. So if the ILO considers the complaint, what can it do about it?
Very little. Okay, so it doesn't have teeth, it doesn't have sanctions, it can issue reprimands, basically. It can say this is bullshit. But the point is we are signatories to the ILO Memorandums of Understanding, and those MOUs are interweaved into both our membership of the European Convention of Human Rights and the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the EU. So the legal opinions that I have seen, there's a very good one from Professor Keith Ewing, who is president of the Institute of Employment Rights, and Lord John Hendy Casey, who is probably the country's foremost employment lawyer, that concludes inadequate and unexplained claims about what happens in other countries will not protect the bill from legal challenge. So if the ILO deem that it's excessive, which they will, because they've already given a preliminary opinion that says if this goes through, we will say it's bollocks. Because minimum standards legislation like this is meant to be done in consultation with the unions. So it's meant to be an agreed thing. You get together with the unions and you say, so what are essential services? Do we agree that they include schools? It's a contentious thing, right? They might include fire services and hospitals, but not schools. And then you say, what are the minimum service levels? And you agree them with the unions. That's what the legislation envisages. In all of those countries the Tories mention, they want to do it unilaterally.
Right.
They want to turn around and say, we consider now legal aid barristers an essential service and you have to provide minimum service levels. And the ILO is likely to say no to that, which then creates problems with the EU in terms of level playing field.